about New York stories in the novels of Spanish-speaking writers. Thank you to the Mount Pleasant Public Library for organizing. Thank you to Alexa Bradenberg for being in charge of this. We are the whole idea for this conversation started in the month of December last year, when World Without Borders published this special issue on our New York, writing the city in Spanish, and featuring a few writers who reside in New York, who have been publishing fiction and non-fiction about the city. And in that issue also, we have an interview with Esther Allen, who is a professor at Baruch College, professor and translator, and somebody who has been studying this phenomena of Spanish-speaking writers in New York City since the 1800s. She specialized in the work of Jose Marti, who is a Cuban poet, writer, hero of the independence of his country, who was in the 1800s publishing nonfiction, and basically his stories were published all over Latin America, and but the tradition continued later. I always like to say that New York today is kind of what Paris was in the 1900s, when every writer wanted to be in Paris. Now a lot of writers, not everyone, but a lot of writers think that having staying in New York for a short, long season is kind of like one experience they want to have. And all the writers you're gonna be listening to today in this conversation are living in New York City, and they have written novels about New York. You can see the screen. I have posted a few novels. Most of them are, I think, with the exception of Manuel Puig, that maybe for maybe 30 years ago, most of these are novels. Some of them are fiction. Antonio Muñoz Molina, Ventanas de Manhattan, is kind of memories from New York. Cuaderno de Jasmina Barrera, Cuaderno de Faros, is some stories that have to be with New York City. But all these most of them are recent books. Recent, I'm talking from the year 2000 forward, about of writers coming to the city and writing stories about their lives in New York. See, we're gonna talk today to Mariana Graciano. Mariana Graciano is from Argentina, and we're gonna be talking, and she lives in New York, in Brooklyn. Or she used to live in, I don't know, you're still in Brooklyn? Good. Doctora Mariana Graciano, she published a few years ago this novel, Pasajes. I'm also part of a publishing house. We published her novel, and we also published a translation of Passages, translated by Sara Pollack. Then she's going to be talking about this novel, Pasajes. So Mayte López, who I think she's here with us now. I believe she entered the room. Mayte López also lives in New York. She's a student of the PhD in Caribbean and Latin American cultures at the Graduate Center CUNY, and she's working towards her PhD, and she has published 2 novels. One of them, Sensación Térmica, was published a few months ago, and is a kind of a sensation around the world. She's getting great reviews, and she's going to be talking. I would like to talk to her specifically about this Sensación Térmica novel, published in Spain by Libros del Asteroide, a very prestigious publishing house. Mario Michelena has published recently a collection of short stories, but we were talking basically about this novel he published I guess also 4 or 5 years ago, Las Esquinas Redondeadas, that is inspired in some of his experiences talking to people in the courts in Brooklyn where he works. Mario Michelena is a very accomplished writer. That just took him a long time to put this novel together, and I was lucky enough. I think I've been lucky enough to being in somehow connected to the process of writing most of the novels that we're gonna be talking about today. But Mario Michelena, I remember reading a version previously to the one that was published, and that was a very great experience. Then Mario is going to be talking about this book, and Sara Cordón, who is a doctor in Caribbean and Latin American Studies for the Graduate Center, and now is doing a postdoc program studies at the NYU, at the University of New York. She published this novel, para español Pulse 2, about her experience studying creative writing in New York City. She also published a few short stories. Some of them received important awards in Spain. And she has been living in New York for almost a decade, or
yeah, already a decade.
Oh, a decade. Okay. Then she's going to be talking about para español Pulse 2 today. My name is Ulises Gonzales. I'm a publisher of this magazine, Los Bárbaros. It's a literary magazine where we publish the fiction of short fiction, short stories, basically poems of writers who live in the city. And we also, with Sara Cordón and two other partners, we have this publishing house whose goal, Chatos Inhumanos, whose goal is to publish the books, the stories, the novels of writers who were from Latin America or Spain, but now they're residing in the United States. Then I have a few topics here. Try to keep it simple because it's only 1 hour, this meeting. We're going to be talking about our New York. I always kind of come to this book, Here is New York, where E.B. White talks about walking the city and imagining that 2 blocks away, this famous writer or this famous critic or musician used to live, or something happened to him in that corner. Then I consider some parts of New York part of my life, my history. I have connections that are sentimental with the city, certain places, certain images, certain streets. I would like each of you to tell me a little bit about what's your New York. What do you consider from in the city, your places, or have a story that you would like to share with everybody. Then we're gonna try to make, since you are writers and you are dedicating your life or part of your life to writing, what are your connections to literature? What inspire you? Other writers that inspire you? Other stories that maybe are somehow connected to your work? What are your connections to the other connections to the world? Maybe you like to, something different than writing that inspires you, that you spend your time doing, maybe not necessarily connected to writing, maybe some sports, some music. And then specifically about your books, you're going to tell us something about, I would like you to tell us something about how you wrote the book. What's the book about? If somebody's curious about looking for the book later, what's the book about? Where came the inspiration for that novel? And then at the end, something about your future projects. What are you writing now? What you like to do in the future? Are you staying in New York for more years, or you are planning to leave soon? That would be also something we can talk about. We can mention. Then I'm going to start with, in order, with Mariana, Dr. Graciano. Would you like to tell us something about your New York?
Okay, thank you, Ulises, and everybody for being here. Yeah, so I like the question. I was just thinking as you were saying it, I like that possessive, our New York, because for me, I've been here 12 years, and I think now I'm starting to feel a little bit like I belong to some extent, to some parts. But for me, coming from Argentina, the only reason why I came to New York was because they have the only master in creative writing in Spanish that I could find. I had no interest in the United States, in the city of New York. I grew up a lefty. I'm still a lefty, and like just the United States is like, all the evil in the world. It's like in the States. So who would like to go to the capital of the evil? But in that sense, I always felt like this is not my place. I don't belong here. And it's been like that for a very long time. I think what changed for me is two things that come to my mind. First is the language. I was so nervous to speak in English, and just so embarrassed, and like it was so hard. I will literally like do a rehearsal before I go and order a coffee and a croissant, and like get super anxious, and I just felt I don't know, like the worst. And it took me a long time to get comfortable being uncomfortable, be okay with the fact that, yeah, English is not my first language. And they're like, I will be in a group of people, they will be talking out like, cultural references from childhood and like music or cartoons they used to watch. I'm like, so all those little things that happen all the time, I will be a foreigner. And then I think slowly, without even realizing, I got more comfortable speaking the language, understanding the language, writing in English. I think that also was it's a big deal. To have that like fluidity when you're writing without translating everything that you're thinking. And then having kids, my kids were born here, and I never thought I was gonna raise a family, and now I have two little New Yorkers. And that changed things because in Argentina, people say people from the US is shanky. So everybody's shanky. I have two little shankies at home. And I married a shanky. And that changes everything because, yeah, this is where my family is. So if they belong here, I belong here. So I have my roots here too. And same way I feel like they belong to Argentina because that's also my place in a way. But yeah, I think those two things, language and having kids, were the things that change that relationship with the city.
Thank you, Mariana. Maybe we can continue with Mayte, then Sara, and then Mario. You don't mind? Ladies first. Okay. Mayte, I don't know, I think you were here, I was mentioning, we're going to start talking about our New York. What's your New York?
Yeah, so I want to start by apologizing about the background noise at the beginning, but we're talking about New York, so it seems fitting. So yeah, my New York, I've been here for 10 years now. Mariana was saying 12, so I do share a sense of this starting to belong, but not quite. But in a sense, that's one of the things I like about New York is that no one belongs and everyone belongs at the same time, right? And I know it's a cliche, but cliches are such for a reason, right? And that I think, yeah, that everyone has this feeling of really wanting to be a part of the city and belonging to the city, but then everyone is from someplace else. And I think that, like, the relationship to a foreign country that Mariana was describing, in a sense, it's sort of lessened by this New York fact that everyone is from someplace else, at least to me, or that is how I'm feeling, while of course sharing a lot of the frustration at times of not quite being, like I said, a part of the conversation or a part of the culture, or not sharing the references and whatnot. And also New York is kind of bittersweet to me, in that when you don't belong, or where you don't have this complete sense of belonging, you sort of find refuge in the people that you share your time with. Like Mariana was saying, I have a family here now too, but before that, I had this sense that New York was like a revolving door, in that you get attached to people, but then they leave, right? Because people usually don't come here to stay here. They just come for a while. So you start to form like your family with your friends, with the people you meet here. And then when you're starting to feel a sense that, okay, these are my people, then they're gone, right? And you have to start all over. So that's interesting for a writer, I guess, because then you can find shelter or find refuge in your own world, in your writing. And then eventually, if you form a family, then that's a different sense. And then it makes the place truly yours, like Mariana was saying. So yeah, my New York is bittersweet for sure, but I'm still here. So yeah.
And you have to finish your PhD.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, Mayte, thank you. Sara?
Hi. Well, like Mayte, I live here for 10 years. I have a very Hispanic relationship with the city. I just recently started working in English, and I'm still trembling. And I think my English started improving also recently, because I started dating a guy from New Jersey. But before that, I used to feel, like not belonging to a certain community in the city, but of course belonging to these Latinx and Hispanic community. As they were saying, the wonderful thing of the city is that it's a very open-minded city, and it doesn't matter that you struggle to communicate. People is willing to understand you, and that's wonderful. It's also, as Mayte said, not an easy relationship with the city, because it's a pretty unfair city sometimes, especially in economic terms. Also, if you suffer any kind of disability, if you are anxious, if you have any kind of mental issues, it's a city that don't help at all. But it's also a very plural, very diverse, and a very beautiful city. The weather is horrible also sometimes. I'm always struggling with my visa. But yeah, in some way, I feel like I've always belonged to that Hispanic community. I start to belong also to this kind of gringo community that now surrounds me at work, in the house, and I feel like I was very lucky to have the opportunity to come here. New York gave me the opportunity to make a brand new start in my life, to start a career that I wasn't able to develop in my country. So I'm very, very happy about that.
Thank you, Dr. Cordón. Let me let's finish this round with Mario. Mario Michelena, please.
Okay. I've been here longer than most. I've been here for 23 years. I actually arrived, in the past century, when it was not yet gentrified as much and not as expensive. I think also the sense of belonging really depends a little bit where you come from, how much you felt you belonged there, which in Peru is always a difficult question. Like, before I left, it would happen to me that if I went to downtown, to the touristic area, and stopped too long to watch, to stare at the church front, people would ask me what country I was from and try to sell me something. So, and that happens all the time. I mean, we have a mutual friend who is, extremely white. And every time he takes a cab in Lima, they would ask him where he's from. And he would mention the neighborhood. But, it's something that never gets resolved completely. On the other hand, because the elites are so tiny in Peru, for me, at least, the feeling of being in college, also because I study humanities, the study of humanities is such a tiny thing. I mean, for you guys to get an idea, I was studying linguistics and literature. We were supposed to have these athletic competitions against all the other groups, and most of them couldn't field a team of anything. I mean, geography would be 4 guys, the graduating class, and philosophy would be 6, and stuff like that. History were 8, and the behemoth was psychology. They were 20. They had reserves. They would have girls from the program going to cheer them and stuff. So the whole thing was so tiny that you felt almost like living inside, in the confines of an inside joke. We would watch the same films. You would go, for example, we would go to the Filmoteca de Arte, to the art cinema in Lima, and you would literally walk and know everybody. I mean, 3/4 of the people would, save you a seat, because there was nothing else to do. This was all pre-internet. So my sense of belonging was almost incestuous, almost you were inside this extended family, and outside of it, you didn't belong in the country. So in a way, it was a very I've never stopped missing that kind of sense of belonging that was extremely familiar, almost too familiar. But I've never felt completely foreign in New York, because I felt foreign in Peru anyway. I mean, it was to a certain extent. Also, I went to a bilingual school, so I didn't have the language barrier much. I had been in LA 2 years, so I have already, getting used to the idea that nobody was going to steal my car and stuff like that. I had kind of, gotten my footing in the feeling of living in a developed country, and I had made the decision of staying in a developed country after 3 months in LA. So I wasn't really torn about, should I go back? I was never going back to live in Peru. So I don't know. But on the other hand, you kind of treasure, or at least in my feeling, you kind of treasure the exoticism of the beginning in New York, the first winter where you were freezing completely, and everything was exotic. I mean, and Ulises knows this, we come from a city where the sun never shines. So if you see sunshine, you are convinced it's gonna be warm, and you walk out in the winter feeling, but there's a lot of sun, it's not going to be that cold, those kind of things. So just the light, even the light is an exotic thing, because Lima has always this kind of haze. So for me, my New York is not even New York. I mean, when I first arrived in LA, I would stare at garbage cans, because they were super modern. They were very well designed. It was just the feeling of a purposeful environment, and not accidental in a way. So I don't know. I've never felt I fully belonged, because I had this experience of very reduced, very, very But on the other hand, I'm very pleased that my children were born here and are going to grow up in a much, open-minded society. And just generally speaking, also, I mean, Lima with internet would be a lot better. I didn't have that experience. So when I grew up in Lima, it was incredibly sterile in an intellectual sense. Like literally you would want to, go and personally punch in the face everybody who was reading for a newspaper, and it was not their fault, because then I worked in the press and I realized that you could not write anything. But just like, the cultural consumption was minimal. There was very little. So suddenly being in the States was like, wow, there's all this stuff. There's the New Yorker magazine, and you could just tell, like, it was almost orgasmic. So in a way, I don't know, it was, I mean, it would never run dry. I mean, New York is a source of fascination. In that sense, you don't belong completely because you don't completely apprehend it. But it's really a fountain of, stimulation, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you, Mario. I would like to start a new round of the talk about your how do you become writers? What are your interests in literature, your readings? And maybe you can start talking about how you start. We already covered half an hour, then that's good. But we have half an hour to talk about the novel. I would like to just a short presentation of how you started becoming a writer. What would make you, what readings, maybe what authors you think are important for your career, and then after that we'll talk specifically about your novel. Then maybe start with Mariana again, and then again Mayte, Sara, and Mario. Thank you.
Okay, so how or why I became a writer, something like that.
What inspired you?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that I wanted to do other things. I wanted to dance, paint, sing, act, any other thing. And then my parents didn't support me in that path, I guess. And writing was the only thing I could do on my own, and that nobody had to drive me anywhere, drop me off, pick me up, pay any extra classes. I begged for my parents to get me a piano. They never got me one. And, I didn't have to get anything in particular. I could just go to my room and write. And that was it. So I found a way of expression. I found a way of getting out of the world, I guess, also within my room. And then some writers, for a very long time, I didn't realize that I was reading men mostly. And so male writers, Argentinian male writers are very strong figures, Borges, Cortázar, they're like these monumental writers in the Spanish language. And it took me a long time to start realizing that I was not reading female writers, that I was interested in reading other women experiences. And so it was in my 20s that I started on purpose diving into, like, going a contramano and trying to find, like, what happened. And the one person that comes to my mind is Silvia Molloy, who recently passed away, because she was very inspirational. She still is. And I found her writing so poetic and so smart. first thing I read from her was an essay on Borges. And then someone told me that she moved to the US. And then when I applied to the NYU program, I also did it because I knew she was teaching it. So it was like, Silvia Molloy teaches there. I was like, what? So in a way, I feel like I've been following her. I still follow her. So she opened a path for me as a reader, as a writer, as an immigrant, like in so many ways. And so yeah, I will just.
Thank you. Mayte, the same question.
Such a hard question. Why I became a writer? I think it's because I loved reading. Like as a child, I would actually hide to read books that I was not supposed to read at that age. Like I would read Garcia Marquez when I was, I don't know, like 12. I started reading before that, but like preteen, you know, looking for all the sexy passages that I was not supposed to be reading. So that was sort of what attracted me to it, sort of a danger and an adventure in other people's words. But then even before that, I would have to credit a lot of my attachment to writing to Elvira Lindo, which you mentioned before. She used to have this character for children's books, Manolito Gafotas, which I would read out loud to my parents, and they would just laugh like all the afternoon. And I found a certain power in being able to make people laugh like that just by words. So I was very attracted to this kind of power, really, to be able to make others feel feelings, you know. So I guess that's sort of when it started happening. But mostly, yeah, I became a writer by reading others. I still have a hard time saying I am a writer, but I guess we all are. And like Mariana, I spent like most of my adult life reading men. So I am now reading almost exclusively women, contemporary writers. There's many. I love Lina Meruane, which was also in the NYU program, but I didn't get to have her as a teacher. Silvia Molloy, of course, but more like young writers, you know, my age and younger, Sara Cordón, Mariana Graciano, Marta Jimenez, there's a bunch. So I recommend people read female writers, and that's it.
Thank you. Sara?
Well, I always like to register my experiences when like writing journals, feeling that the day can pass, but if you register what happened that day, something remains. And when I had this opportunity to come to New York to study this MFA in creative writing too, and for a long period of time, I suffered the imposter syndrome, which now I know it happens to many people, because you confront your writing, just you write because you like it, but also some teachers tell you that writing matters, that you can change things in the world through writing, and that writing is political, and you get so overwhelmed. I was just writing because you know, I like it, and for a long time I was not able to write anymore, but thanks to Ulises in his magazine Los Bárbaros, and thanks to Viceversa that encouraged me to keep on writing. well, I've kept on writing, and I'm very happy about that. My references, as Mayte said, are nowadays you, my colleagues, of course, Mayte, Mariana, Mario, but also other, the same as Mayte and Mariana. I'm also trying on purpose to read more female writers, and I am loving the experience because I can reflect my own experiences on what I read. And also I like reading experiences of immigration. I love reading Gabriela Wiener, Mercedes Cebrián, Fernanda Trias, which also studied with us. And I love sharing this press with you, Ulises, Chatos Inhumanos, because it gives us the opportunity of reading wonderful manuscripts. I'm loving the book we are editing now, Gabriela Politz, Los Libros de los Otros. So yeah, super happy about that.
Thank you, Sara. Now, Mario.
Sorry. Okay. Ahí estoy. Yeah, I think, I mean, I always, when I was a kid, like kindergarten, I used to do like comic books, like drawings and stories. And then I always liked to write and read. I had an older sister, so I used to try to read what she was reading. So it was always a challenge, and that was interesting. There was a fair amount of books in my house, fortunately, although my parents were both scientists, but you know, they had books, they had fiction. Yeah, I think I've always written. Really, there's nothing else that have interested me in the same way, I think. Really, I mean, I've always been very, I mean, you know, you need to do something to survive and pay the bills and everything. But I've never been torn about doing this or doing something else in terms of the deepest ambition, let's say. I've always wanted to be a writer, basically because it was so open-ended, because, you know, you were not at a disadvantage against anybody. You didn't need funds, you didn't need collaborators, you didn't need anything. Which of course is extremely frustrating and yeah, I mean, it's very sterile in a way. But I don't know, I am not a very spontaneous person, so I like that kind of challenge, I guess. I don't know, and I think I personally feel that there's writers that have kind of marked every stage in the time that I've been trying to write. Like when I was a teenager, I loved Cortázar, and I always took his side in the, you know, unending debate, Cortázar versus Borges, which was like celebrity deathmatch, you know, ultimate in our generation. And then I used to love Simone de Beauvoir. I mean, in every sense, like platonically and everything. And you know, back then, I used to envy her because she had lived in a time where there was no TV and no distractions. So she had, because I used to read the memoirs. And of course, it was like, it's incredibly intense intellectual life and this, like, you know, endless, you know, readings, endless, you know, sit downs to read for like hours. And of course, you would attribute your own inability to do that not to just the fact that you didn't have the intellectual drive, but, you know, there's TV. Oh, there's TV. She was, you know, blessed with an older time. And which, you know, I guess it's true to a certain extent, because you see it, I see it with my kids, I mean, and with ourselves. I mean, I read less now than I used to read when I was a teenager. And not for lack of time, because of this monster and everything else. So I'm kind of going in a tangent. Anyway, in terms of so that, I mean, I used to love Cortázar, then I used to love Simone de Beauvoir. I think as a mature writer, I remember I've always been very self-critical. I mean, I'm very critical of everybody else, as Ulises knows. I have a very bad reputation in the workshop that we do because I just basically go and, destroy everybody's writing, but then also mine. So, it's a fair game. I remember I wrote the first story that I considered viable or mature when my daughter was in the hospital just as a newborn. So it was a very bad time. It was like, damn it, now I'm never going to have time again. And only now at, what was I, like 33, I'm able to write something even passable. It turned out that I still had time and etc. But back then, the writer that really impressed me in that time was Alice Munro. I remember because I came to her because Jonathan Franzen had published in the New York Times Book Review an article when he said basically she's the best writer in English, in the English language, alive, and he took the opportunity to attack Philip Roth, indirectly, but basically it's like, it's not Philip Roth, it's Alice Munro. And part of his argument was saying, his books are not called, The Plot Against Canada or Oh Canada or anything like that. And I thought, I read her and that was completely transformative and, it made you feel, minuscule and irrelevant. But on the other hand, was kind of a template, like you want to be able to do this. Then later on, there's all kinds of things. There's a story called The Bad Graft that I gave to everybody that I could, that appeared in the New Yorker by the same author that wrote Vampires in the Lemon Grove. She writes like really crazy stories, crazy good also when she hits the nail in the head. Her name escapes me, but there's so many. Literally, I don't have a person that I know personally that guides me. I always say that I have the sad responsibility of having to read myself, but otherwise I wouldn't, because, literally the world is chock full of, absolutely amazing, groundbreaking books. And if we write a groundbreaking phrase, that would be, already a consolation, but, it's a different kind of game. So yeah, I think that's kind of the aspiration for me.
Okay, Mario, thank you very much. We have like 14 minutes. Then I was thinking we're gonna talk about maybe in 3 minutes, 4 minutes, each of you, and I'm gonna try to take time that everybody can talk. Maybe we have a few minutes for questions. I'm not sure about that. About the novel, I'm gonna share the screen again, and I'm gonna show the cover of the novel we're talking about. And I would like you to not to talk about the plot, but how do you write, how important this is for you, how it connects to this life in New York we were talking about. And maybe at the end, you can conclude, since we don't have a lot of time, with what are you writing now, what are you working on? And okay, and it's 3 minutes each. Just check that you're gonna make this reaction in the screen, then more or less that your time is over, then we all can talk. Then let's start with Mariana.
Okay, time on. Pasajes, that novel is very connected to New York, in the experience of coming from Argentina, being in a foreign language and all that. I wrote it, I started writing it when I was in the MFA. So my first couple of years, and then I continued working on it. I didn't know it was going to be a novel. I wasn't sure what that's going to be. But it ended up being a short novel. It looks like entries from like a diary or like someone's notebook. And it's the story of, so the character, the narrator that is writing, she's a scientist and she starts losing connection with time and space. So she gets disoriented, and it came to me that what I wanted to explore is the feeling of outrooting, is that the word? Desarraigo.
Mhm.
And how can we describe that feeling of not belonging, of being a foreigner, of missing home, of being homesick, but as literally a form of sickness. So something that happens biologically in your body. So the exploration is kind of like that. So all those emotions and psychological states that she's struggling with are seen from a scientific point of view. So the book also doesn't have any chronological order. So the reader experiences some of that disorientation that the character is experiencing. Something like that. And so that was my second book. Now I'm finishing my third book. Hopefully will come out before the end of the year. And it's a memoir with an epistolary form, I like to say, because there are two long letters intertwined. So it's the story of my family relationship with the air. So the novel or the book, it's called Oar, which means the air in Galician, Gallego. And yeah, that's what I'm exploring. So I think my first book was fiction, short stories. Second book was like a fictional memoir. So there was a lot of personal stories in there. Now I'm like all the way into nonfiction.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Mayte, tell us about Sensación Térmica.
Yes. So Sensación Térmica is a story about violence against women, mostly about psychological violence, but not exclusively. But that's the part I was most interested in. And it's also a story about vulnerability, right? And in that sense, I think New York plays a crucial role in that these characters are, the two main characters, Lucia and Juliana, are students in New York. They don't have their families, they're alone. So that makes them even more vulnerable to gender violence, to male violence, and to the violence of the city itself. At the beginning of this talk, we were talking about, Sara and Mario mentioned the weather, right? And how it's hard to get used to the cold, especially, but also to the heat. And Sensación Térmica, the title refers to that, right? To knowing the difference between what the weather channel tells you, like how many degrees out there, and the feels like sensation, right? The wind chill. So it's a play on the difficulties of the weather, and also the difficulties of sometimes knowing what is love and what isn't. New York also plays an important role in the novel, in that these characters sort of try to escape the violence from their home countries, especially the main character, Lucia, who comes from a violent family, and she finds that there is no escape from violence even in New York. So which offers, like Sara, I think, was saying, New York offers a clean slate, but when it comes to this kind of violence and to this kind of background, sadly, not even New York can help them escape that. So definitely New York plays, it's almost like a character, another character of this novel. And what am I working on right now? My dissertation. So no fiction for me. I see Isolina Ballesteros, our professor. She's part of my committee. So I'm working, I promise. And that's it.
Thank you, Mayte. Let me pass this and go to Mario, Michelena, and then we close with Sara.
Okay. Well, this novel it's a crime novel. It has to do with a church that is laundering money, which I thought that, if you're gonna launder money in big amounts, a church is perfect because, it doesn't really have to explain the source of the funds. It can always say that it's donations, and then, it has perfectly inscrutable motives to send it abroad. Like, oh, we have missionary work in Colombia or wherever. So I thought a church was, very ad hoc institution to launder money. And the title has to do with the fact that the central character is not a criminal, is not a criminal at heart. So the idea that in Lima, at least, there's, I wouldn't say a lot, but a fair amount of like Art Deco buildings, like hospitals, for example, and public buildings. And some of them tend to have these corners that are rounded. So this expression of, oh, you turned a corner, you went from good to bad, it's more like a slide. You start corrupting yourself without even noticing. And you get sucked into it, those kind of things. And for me, part of the experience that was fascinating about writing a book, well, first of all, writing a novel and a relatively long novel was a whole like tour de force and required a level of discipline and a level of acceptance of the flaws and the limitations that I don't usually have. So that was a good learning experience. But also linguistically, because there's like two different criminal crews, and one it's made up of Colombians and the other is made up of Dominicans. So I had to work like the slang and all those things. And it's something very specific. I work as judiciary interpreter, so I meet people in jail and etc. So picking up from there and internet glossaries, and it's very interesting because I think that's a very New York experience. I mean, I didn't really know the slang of other Latin American countries until I came to New York and then started learning the slang of every country. And not only the slang, but the idiosyncrasies, if you want. So, for example, my sister read the novel and she never realized that these crews were from different countries. She thought that it was all just like, criminal slang in New York, in Spanish, I mean. And, but on the other hand, I had the experience once of, going with an attorney to visit his client who was Colombian, and he used one of the slang expressions that I used exactly in the same way. And I was like, yes, because, I had taken it from the internet. So all of those kind of things are, for me, a very New York experience. Of it takes place in New York and everything, but and the protagonist is a super, which is also kind of a very New York figure, like the super. So yeah, I guess. And in terms of what I'm working now, I'm working on several things because I have a hard time, being satisfied and completing anything. So I started writing a novel during the pandemic, then I abandoned. I'm kind of always in the back of my mind. And then, things we do in the workshop. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, Mario. And now, Sara, let's talk about para español Pulse 2.
As you can see in the cover, New York completely inspired my novel. Since New York is a place with these particular interactions, the novel is about the complexity of those interactions between people that speak different variants of Spanish, people that speak Spanish, people that speak English, people that can communicate, even speak completely different languages, people that speak the same language but are not able to communicate at all. So I employ irony and humor in order to transform my own experiences in something enjoyable. And the experiences I live every day with these problems with communication. And for Spanish, press 2, para español pulse 2, is about a very specific Spanish-speaking community, the community of writers in Spanish, and they struggle a lot, but because they want to belong, and when you want to belong, you want to fight, and sometimes you have to to destroy someone in order to belong to the community, to remove someone and get in. So this novel presents those experiences of Latin American and Hispanic characters. They have different levels of privilege and precarity. But the important thing is that they are all able to generate resistance, changes, and through this Pulse 2, this press 2 that gives you the opportunity to communicate in your own language through the telephone, people are able to do things, to write things in their own language, to be critic. So that's para Español Pulse 2.
I think we have, yes, it's 8 o'clock. We are, I just realized I just realized now that I've been in the presentations of most of these books. I was in the presentation of Para Español Pulse 2 in Madrid. Sara put me to speak like a Chilean, I remember. I promise I'm never gonna do it again. I was in Peru for Mario's presentation, I remember, at the International Book Fair in Lima, and I was for Mariana's representation. Of course, we were the publishers in New York. I wasn't at Mayte's presentation probably because of the pandemic. I haven't taken a plane in a long time. I promise to do it soon, but it was great to see everybody, great to talk with you. And I don't know if anybody has questions, maybe, and I would like to ask Alexa, we have a couple of minutes for questions, or just
yeah, no problem. If anyone has a question. I mean, that was so wonderful. I loved that. I particularly loved the way you hearing about your relationship with New York, because I don't hear that very often. That's fantastic. I mean, as somebody who was born there,
yeah,
you know.
I have to say, like Mariana said, and I didn't want to interrupt, but I also, when I was a kid growing up, I remember having a map of the Americas without the US. And when people say you will live in the US, I never. It's a country I'm never going to live. It's in the US. But I remember also saying, I tell my friends, well, make an exception for New York, because New York is different.
That's funny, because for me, I was born in New York, and it was like you could never live in Westchester. Never.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, I live in Westchester.
I know, me too. Okay.
But it's funny because, for example, the other day I was leaving in the morning, and I saw a guy running, and I offered him a train ride, and he happens to be from Romania, and his wife is from Poland. And my neighbors in Westchester, on one side, there are a couple of Romanians, there were a couple of Brazilians, somebody from Russia, and we're all mixed too. And everybody, of course, works in New York City. Like I work in the Bronx, or people work in Manhattan.
But I wonder if they all feel that sense of not the sense of belonging, no sense of belonging, like you all mentioned.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
I guess
different.
in the beginning.
Yeah, it's different. I still have, when I was talking about our New York, I was imagining when I came, and the moment I opened because I came to Westchester, my first experience in New York, in the US, was in Westchester. Then the experience of opening the doors of Grand Central after taking the train and looking at this 42nd Street, I still remember how I felt. Or playing football in Central Park with my friends from English school, and that was kind of like my early memories. And yeah, it's nice to talk to people and see what's their connection with the city. Was great about this conversation. And I don't know, any questions?
If you have a question, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, there are no questions. We can go.
I have one question.
I'm
so sorry.
Okay,
just really quickly. I was just wondering, are the books written in Spanish or English? And then my second question, well, not really a question. I was just wondering, Professor Ulises, if you can mention again the name of the publishing company.
Okay. Thank you, Ibeliz. The reason of this conversation was people writing in Spanish in New York, but some of the work of these authors have been translated. The publishing house is Chatos Inhumanos. I know Chatos is a word that has different meanings in different parts of the world. but in my experience, Chato in Peru is a person who is very little. And when I proposed the name of Chatos Inhumanos was because I just have twins. Then I have two little miniature human beings who were not exactly human beings yet. Then they are inhumans and they are very little, Chatos Inhumanos. And I remember proposing the name that came from nowhere. And Sara liked it, but the other partners didn't like it. Then after a month of deliberation and voting on different names, finally we got to the same start.
The best, Chatos Inhumanos.
Yeah, I like the name. But then if you, Ibelis and everybody else, if you want to read some of the translations from some of the authors today in English, please go to Word Without Borders. In December 2021, they published a whole issue on Spanish-speaking writers in New York. Our New York, or Nuestro New York, it's called. You can Google it, and then you have some of these authors translated. The book of Mariana, the Nouvelle Pasajes, has been translated into passages. Mayte López, I don't know if she's working on translations. Mario, certainly we have a collection of short stories in Chatos Inhumanos that is going to be published soon. It's ready. One of the stories actually is published in this issue of Words Without Borders, but the book is coming soon in English. And Sara, I know she's working also on the translation of this novel, but I don't know when it's coming. Then you can find information in this issue of Word Without Borders about each of the authors, and in the Chatos Inhumanos publishing house website, chatosinhumanos.com.
I think someone else had a question.
Oh, this is Omi Duara. Hi, Professor. I
Hi.
got a quick question. My question is, let's say I want to learn Spanish. How can I get started? Because since they said it was hard learning a second language coming from a different country, so how do you get started learning a different language?
Hi, that's a question for me.
For everyone, how did
Yes.
like the ones that came out of the US, how did they start learning English? What are the steps and all, so I can learn Spanish too as a second language?
Okay, well, the easiest way, I think Sara knows something about that. Get a boyfriend or a good friend that you can talk all day in Spanish. That's the simplest one. There are places where you can study Spanish, but depending on your ability, I guess I would recommend if you know somebody who lives in a country where they speak Spanish, to go for that for 1 month, 2 months, if you can do that. Of course, not everybody can do that, but there is very easy ways to get immersed into a Spanish-speaking neighborhood here in New York City. Just find friends and ask them to talk to you in Spanish. That's the easiest way to learn to talk the language. But if you have somebody who invite you to stay for 1 month in Colombia, in Peru, in Uruguay, in Argentina, you go there, probably you learn more in 1 month than if you would learn taking Spanish classes during a few years. But depends, everybody's different.
That's a great answer.
Good advice.
That's a good answer.
Thank you. I think.
Anybody else?
I don't know. Any other question? No?
Guess not.
Let's wrap it up.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I wanted to find out like what inspired you guys to become writers?
Who wants to answer?
I think just really quick, what we were saying before, right? For me, it was reading other people's work, which was the main thing, being inspired by others first.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, also maybe lack of other talents, but generally speaking, yeah, I mean, you are very, very impressed by things you read, and yeah, I guess. I mean, you feel you can do it, or at least approach, be not too far. I mean, I don't know, when I was in school, there were these like poems that you had to write on Mother's Day, let's say. So it was the moment when you were, face to face with, having to come up with something. And that was stimulating, I guess.
I'm gonna say something that it's gonna sound a little weird, but for me, writing is a kind of a mindfulness exercise, because when I write, for me, it's very difficult to concentrate. But when I write, I can do it, and I put all my energy, all my concentration, and what I am doing, and it actually feels very good for me. Spending time and be present in something that is not actually present because it's developing. So that's my experience with writing.
I like all the other people's answer, and I share some of that to some extent, all those experiences. I just want to say maybe something similar to what I said before. So I ended up writing because that was the only thing I could do on my own, that I didn't needed any more money or classes or anything. And I like writing. I feel like in that sense, it's very democratic. Everybody can write. Anybody can write. Anybody can be a writer. You just need something to write with. That's it.
Yeah, and I think going back to what Sara was saying, I think, I don't know, but when you are really passionate and engaged about something, you have that experience that, time flies, which doesn't in most things. I mean, I don't think I've ever felt, except playing squash that I was bad at, but very passionate about, I don't think I've ever felt as immersed on anything but writing. I mean, that literally just hours go by and you're really extremely focused in a way that you are not with other things. So your mind is engaged in a way that the rest of the things that happen don't engage you, maybe.
Thank you.
Very inspiring.
Thank you. Yes, very inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also write because it's easy. I agree with Mariana. When I never play any instrument because once my mom put me in flute classes, and instead of the flute, because the flute was too expensive, she gave me a quena. And quenas and flutes are not the same. And they're suffering for a year trying to do. The kids were doing, I don't know, Mozart, all this stuff, and I was like. And that was my grandfather's quena. It's my own name. I was kind of like, oh, nice, but I couldn't do it. And writing I enjoy writing too, and I can agree that writing is something, what said Sara, that makes you go to places and forget that I'm very bad at all the stuff, like Mario said. Or
I think there's some people have to have a little talent too. I mean, you're all underplaying it a little bit, just.
Yeah, a little bit, but we're doctors and we're, like I tell my friends, you can call me doctor, and then I'm gonna tell you, no, you don't need to call me doctor. But first you have to say it. But I don't know. I think we are over the time. Maybe we should say thank you, and thank you, Alexa, for having us here. And we hope in the future we can organize something like this. I think was a great conversation. As I said, I don't know if a lot of participants, but I promised everybody who registered I was gonna send the link. And it's gonna be recording. It's recording, and I know that when you share it on the social networks, other people can watch it, and maybe this is gonna reach more people than.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here tonight.
Okay. Yes, I will send you the link and I'll post it. Thank you so much.